So yeah, should I start? I guess I should.
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome everyone to today's expert session, which is titled Data Architecture for Data Science Projects. Before starting, I want to ask a couple questions to the audience. So who is working or has worked somewhere in the past with an architect as a direct colleague? Okay. Come on. It's solution architect, enterprise architect, project architect. I don't care. Like somebody who you had to work with and had the name architect in the title. Yosko says yes from over here. Okay, from the ones who said yes, who thinks that having an architect as a direct colleague or colleague was a positive experience?
Was it?
Positive experience, like having an architect.
Yeah.
Okay, Hido said yes.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. You're trying to be nice. Mixed, Yosko says mixed, yeah. Well, yeah, there are some nice people in the audience, but yeah, for me, how does it work? Yeah, okay. For me, like when in the first part of my working life, so to speak, I had to work with architects, and I hated the role with so much passion, huh? Until I was offered to be one. So, and yeah, that's a little bit, it's a bit of dilemma. So you can see the dilemma in the agenda. There's this existential crisis going on, like what and why and how and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, today I'll try to talk to you about, this journey that I had, maybe a little bit how I see things in this domain. So we will talk about like what is an architect, and we will from there we'll dig deeper into definition of a data architect, a solution architect, and our feelings about architects, both positive and negative. And then, hopefully we'll have a nice interactive Q&A session where, we can talk about everything. So, but before that, I want to give you a prelude. So before talking about the architect, I think we have to talk about what architecture is. And, well, the hint is in the name, in the sense. So architecture in a building is pretty much a metaphor for architecture in high-tech industry, both software and hardware. And what it means, at least, I can identify at least like three major things about this. And one of them is that the architecture is really about making structural choices. So like, if you want to have a building that looks like a almost falling Jenga box or something, then if you change your mind the other day and decide to have a cylinder, it's kind of hard to make that choice, change that choice that you have made early on, right? And then the second part, also an important part, those structural choices that are kind of like in the core of your design, turn into a blueprint of how the thing will look in the end. Like an architect sits down and literally draws a building so that the building can be built. And then the final part, I think is also important, is that this blueprint turns into a series of tasks, which is most of the time, there is a certain dependency, which I mean is that like you cannot build the roof before building the ground floor, right? So there's a list of tasks and there's an execution order and those kind of things. So this is how more or less an architecture of a building looks like. Well, from there, let's go to the architect in the high-tech world. So what is an architect? So to me, initially, and sometimes still, an architect is the guy in the project where you have to consult or you have to get okay for a technical decision. But when you look at their calendar, it looks like this. Yeah. But then there's something funny about it. Like you say, like the guy is busy. Yeah. Okay. He's a busy guy. But then you can look at the repo contribution, which is my real repo contribution from a project that I was an architect. And it looks like this. So like, what the hell is this guy doing all day? Huh? I mean, like going from meeting to meeting, blah, blah, blah. And not really coding anything, not doing any real work, so to speak. And then every now and then they come and throw you a slide deck like this with, I don't know, if you like boxes left and right, different setups. Some of them are next to each other, connected with arrows. Some of them are stacked and stuff. Some, I don't know, like some figures that, and then just like, what? I mean, what is this guy doing really? Like, what is this guy really doing? Well, I was under the same impression as well, but Then, in my experience, I have seen more senior architects that are good, and then I've seen that are a little bit better. So I'm trying to be politically correct here, so we'll say good and better. Yeah. And to me, a good architect, I think, is a combination of these three things. Like these three, a good architect, I hope, sits on these three pillars, which actually are, when you dig deep into it, it's not a really easy job. It doesn't. It's not as easy as you think from the previous slide. So one of the big parts is that it's the system engineering. And I don't know if you have worked with system engineers, like dedicated system engineers, but I mean, you respect those guys. They know a lot about what's going on in the broad scale. So that's something respectful, nice. And if you go down to like really what a system engineer means, it's about requirements engineering, defining the requirements, not an easy task, really. And when I say requirements engineering, I don't say it in a small way. I hate when engineering is tagged into like a random word, but I think in this case, it's really an engineering. And then you go to system design from there. So, you know, like big parts, big decisions, structural decisions that are not easy to change. And then, of course, you have to think not only within the boundaries of your system, but you have to start thinking about the ecosystem that you need to integrate. Because usually your system is not in isolation. Your system is inside a family of other systems. So integration is also a big part of this. And then I think the second pillar is the solution design, where you get a little bit more practical and start thinking about like what kind of technology stack that you are going to use, and the compliance that your institution has, like that is stuff that you have to comply, and of course cost. And cost can have different definitions. Cost can be money, cost can be in time, cost can be like, yeah, different things, but there's something to keep in mind also. And then the bottom part, I think, is especially in teams of 5, 10 people, maybe not so big, but like in manageable size of teams, I think that technical leadership becomes a huge part of architecture as well. And what do I mean by that? So you got in a very big project, you can have an architect who throws you like literally pukes a blueprint on you and then say like, yeah, okay, my job is done. But then there is an architect, there's a type of architect that kind of like stays with the team during the process of building. And that's what I mean by technical leadership. And that goes into like really building the roadmap, that's the list of tasks that I was trying to tell. And then once you build the roadmap of like how, like what are the dependencies and how things are going to be built, then you kind of have to know your team pretty well to know who is good at doing what and who likes doing what. So that's the delegation part. Say like, yeah, can you work on this? Can you work on that? Blah, blah. And then once the work is done, there's somebody who has to sign off the works, who has to say that like, okay, this works as expected, no patterns are being broken, etc., etc. So engineering sign off. So that's the technical leadership part of the architect for me. And in the middle, in all of these, you have to talk to a lot of people, and that's the stakeholder management. And that's why, unfortunately, an architect's calendar looks really busy. Yeah.
Just to ask a question,
Hi, yeah. Yeah, that's why I wanted to have a Q&A session afterwards, but yeah, let me see. Sometimes once, what? Is that architect not just being the PO? No. I'll come to that, Josko. Let's discuss this afterwards, but there's a fundamental difference, and I'll come to that. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. So now we have an idea about like, I can't use next. Okay, let's use the mouse. Yeah. So we have an understanding of what an architect is in the high-tech world, software, hardware, anything. So then what is a data architect? I think the data architect is it's not working. Anchor workspace, or where's my next? Huh? The arrow goes to the other slide.
Click with the mouse. The right on the external window.
This one. All right. Okay, now it works. Yeah. To me, a data architect is a software architect for a specific. It's the way I see it is this: like software architect is a subset of architect, and then data architect is a subset of software architect, which is a software architect who is specialized on data-driven systems, which is like the buzzword, as we all know. So yeah, and no, yeah, there is a distinction between the definition of data architect before big data and after big data. I think this slide is too technical, but I'll try to give you the gist of it. Like, big data changed fundamentally how the data is stored, so to speak. So before big data really arrived, the way to be a data architect was a little bit different than later. We can dive into a bit of the technical discussion if you're curious about it, but for now I'll skip all these details too much. So, okay, we know what a data architect is, what an architect in general is. So then what is a solution architect? So this is the data and AI landscape of 2020. Can you guys read the slides?
Yeah.
Is it readable? Yeah? You can read like what's it?
No, we can't read it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the purpose. Like, I mean, this is crazy. There's no silver bullet in data and AI. And solutions are a series of trade-offs. So you got so many tools specific that are very good in specific things, but not so good in others. You have tools that are more generalistic. You have like all these sorts of things. And to me, a solution architect is a guy a person who has enough specification level knowledge of what kind of trade-offs have been made for each of these tools, and can make a kind of like an educated guess looking at the problem at hand, what tools to use. So it's kind of like, the analogy is a little bit to me like, have you ever had this friend who like knows about like every specification of every car on market, and if you go and ask like, yeah, what's the best family car for this given money range, like what would you suggest me? And then the guy would like immediately tell you like the exact model and spec and everything, but he has never driven one, or at most test drive. Like, that's the solution architect. The solution architect does not have deep knowledge on how these tools work, and you cannot know everything about it. You cannot even know like this much, you know, like, it's super hard. But if you have a broad overview of like what is happening in the industry, you can steer your way towards like a relatively good solution, I think. So to me, that's what the solution architect is. Questions or? So, I mean, I think people don't like architects that much. I didn't. So why do people hate architects? So I was thinking about this. There's this like sad little guy in the middle. It's getting like all sorts of fees from everyone in the project. So why? And usually, like, I could classify a little bit of like the criticism towards an architect. And let's start with the data engineers. Like, data engineers usually think that architects became architects because they were too afraid to code, right? Like, every time like you come and say it, you come and try to say like something technical and stuff, you can like kind of like hear in the back of the mind, it's like, yeah, you're a coward, you know, like you ran away from the kitchen, you know, like you're too senior to code now. Yeah. So like, that's the data engineer's perspective to an architect. Huh? So that's one given. And then you got the data scientist who could not care less about anything about the code. Like, code for them is IT work. It's so mundane, and it's like a nuisance almost. They want to do modeling, they want to dive into statistics, they want to like draw nice graphs and stuff like that, but they are too cool to care about the code, right? So they go like, I mean, why do you even bother me? Like, I'm doing my own thing here. So that's the data scientist. And then you got the project manager, Yosko, the PO in this case, which like is like the most annoyed person towards an architect is, I think, a PO, because they feel like every time they want to do something, they want to deliver a feature, they want to please the end users and stuff, you are kind of like the guy who's hitting on the brakes and say like, no, let's slow down. We have other stuff to do. We have technical debt to cover. We have to do some refactoring, or like, this is not how it's done. Let's not do a point solution. Let's think about this. Let's think about the design. And then like, after some point, they get super pissed off. Like, and they really, really don't want to hear another word from you. So that's the project manager. Right? So yeah, what does this like sad little guy do in the middle? Well, I think he or she has to learn how to fight alone in this setup. And I think there are some nice answers that you can give to like any of these guys. So like first start with the data engineer. I think the way to gain the respect of a data engineer is to kind of like demonstrate under the hood that like you understand what's going on in code. You could code if you want to, but like you don't as much anymore. But you're up for your game. You're not obsolete. Yeah. So that's what you should do to a data engineer as an architect. So, and for the data scientist, you have to keep on evangelizing and evangelizing and evangelizing, saying like, there is something about design. Design is not so mundane. Design is not something stupid. Design is actually cool. Design is what makes everything work. So that's what you would say to a data scientist. I mean, I try to say to data scientists and at least evangelize. And for the PO, for the project manager, you have to put your foot on the ground and you have to like really put your stance, because at some point I feel a project's prowess in technical achievement and quality and everything is an engineer's work ethic. And usually the project managers don't really understand that. And they want results and value and all that stuff. But yeah, you have to like really hold your ground. And sometimes they get like big titles like manager and this and that. No, I mean like you have to be brave against it, and you have to say like, this is how it's done, because you have the knowledge of how to do it. So that's the only way to do, I think.
Then,
Sure.
Did you try to let them fail?
Huh?
Did you try to let them fail?
I can't hear.
Did you try to let them fail?
Let them fail. That it's like it breaks my heart when a project fails. So no, I haven't tried it yet. No. Yeah.
What if you don't have an architect in your project?
We will come to that. You don't always need an architect, I think, but sometimes you do.
Most of the time,
Yeah, it's good. Like
how do you see the dynamics that you saw in the slide?
without an architect in the middle. Yeah, that becomes like, it becomes a distributed problem, because like everybody hates everybody. There's no architect in the middle to like commonly hate. So yeah, it becomes nice. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
So to what extent do you put them down? Is it like if the project manager says we need to get on with things, do you still
Escalate to the sky, you know, like I'm telling you, like this is really it. Like it's about the work ethic in the end, right? I mean, you don't want to bring a really, pardon my French, but like shitty solution as an engineer, right? Yeah, that's the line.
I get that, but to what extent though? Do you, if the company makes a loss at some point?
Loss as in like value.
Yeah.
It's deep discussion. Let's come to back to that later, okay? Value is a tricky word. Yeah. Let's come back to that later. So okay. So why do you need an architect? Or sometimes you don't. But like if you need, most of times you don't, I think. But if you happen to need one, like why? I think the top part is probably sounding familiar to everyone, like an end user coming and saying like, after the feature delivery, it's like, this is not what I want. Like I wanted something else stupid. And it's like, okay. Or project management, joining a lot of meetings of like stakeholding or interface and stuff. And you can like totally tell from their face that they don't understand anything about what's going on. So yeah, that's, especially if it gets more technical. And then you get a team sometimes every now and then, I think pretty often, that like the team themselves don't like the quality of the work that they do. They know it, and they even get demotivated sometimes of how spaghetti the code looks like. So, well, I think an architect in a project can be a potential solution to this. Like how can he or she be a potential solution? So, I think a lot of wrong feature delivery is because there is no explicit owner of design. And when people, and it's like, I mean, it has been a while that especially like extreme programming, agile, all these like test and iterative methods and of development make a lot of people question whether you need design at all. But I think there's no such thing as no design. There's only bad design. I mean, or if there's no design and if there's no emergence or if there's no intentionality, then you might be lucky to end up with a good design, but like your chances are real low. Chances are you will end up with poor design. And then the intentional architecture parts, which is like the big picture, understandable, business level and everyone. So you basically do that by Googling for your project manager, and you understand the concept and you kind of like bring it up to their level, not down. Yeah. And for the team, yeah, there has to be that usually it makes a lot of sense when there's someone who keeps on reminding the team that like a good code base takes effort. Like you have to keep adhering to the design principles and patterns. You have to have good test coverage, linting, like blah blah, like anything. But when there is a person who is kind of responsible for that and keeps on reminding the team that like, yeah, there's no free lunch basically, then I think it gets a little better, at least most of the time. So you can also map, going to the first slide, that like the design is about systems engineering, architecture of solution design loosely, and best practices a little bit of like technical leadership basically. Yeah, my last slide before Q&A. So my key takeaways from being on both sides. First key takeaway is that like I want to underline that design is not totally dead. It's dead sometimes, but sometimes it's irrelevant. And I think there's a reason, I keep on saying this, but I think there's a reason that Gartner said, I think like more than 80% of AI data science projects never materialize into production. Well, my culprit as an architect, of course, is that because like, yeah, people don't think about design anymore. It's a bunch of POCs here and there. Yeah, point solutions, proof of concepts, you know. So from my point of view, that's what's missing most of the time. And the second one is that like architect role should not only be a senior developer role on steroids, like so much on steroids that like they are going away from development. Like, no, like you have to be hands-on, you have to be like keeping base with the team all the time. You have to be at least like read your code base, if not write it. And I think that's not all architects are created equal. As I said, like there are good ones and then there are better ones. So if you find the better one, I think like keep them around. And yeah, I have to say this also, like most architects are really fragile because like they know that all the developers are talking behind their back during the lunch session, you know, like, and they don't get invited to the lunch table and they have to go and sit with the project management because like they're going to be gossiped as well. So, I mean, treat the guys good actually. Like sometimes they mean good. So like, I don't know. And my conclusion is just keep one around in case you need it. Feed them peanuts every now and then, you know. And I mean, they might be useful depending on where your project is going. So this is it. Thank you. Yeah.